So we have three possible scenarios now. Three situations that could have happened, none of which fits into the government's cover story of a single ANFO explosion on the street and of Tim McVeigh acting alone. However, we believe we can correctly assume that there was an ANFO bomb that exploded in a truck outside the Murrah Building. So at this point, we must suppose that one of three things happened. First, Tim McVeigh, along with John Doe 2, whoever he is, and acting in concert with absolutely no one else at the scene, parked the truck loaded with explosives, ignited it at the scene with the fuse or from a remote location moments later, and set off the blast. They were not aware that explosives had been stored on the 9th floor by DEA, BATF, and the Secret Service. The truck explosion on the outside triggered the cache on the inside a few seconds later. This would account for the multiple explosions heard by hundreds of witnesses and even captured on tape, as well as the two separate shakes on the seismograph, 5 seconds apart. One can imagine the embarrassment, not to mention the liability the agency would shoulder if these facts became public knowledge. Therefore, it was in the best interest of the government to demolish the building to prevent any further investigation. But we know also from the unanimity of opinion of the multitude of experts that this alone could not have sheared the columns and cut this kind of pattern through the structure. Therefore, we must eliminate this supposition almost as quickly as we consider it. The second and third possibilities involve more intrigue and provide even a more sinister answer to the question of why this gigantic effort at a cover-up. Now let us assume for a moment that John Doe 2 is leading Tim McVeigh around by the nose, coercing him into buying the fertilizer, renting the truck, etc. But John Doe 2 is also working closely with the government, relaying all the information to them, unbeknownst to Tim McVeigh, of course. Tim, then, is the inveterate and the classic patsy, much as was Lee Harvey Oswald in 1963. So when the truck bomb goes off at 9:02, the barometric super bomb described by Gunderson, Ray, and Reconnaissance is triggered by a Confederate in an unmarked helicopter, which was seen above the building by several witnesses at the time of the explosion. On the surface, this theory seems to have merit, but it simply does not and cannot fit, again, the pattern of destruction. In an attempt to show that perhaps both Gunderson and General Parton were correct, that several super bombs were strategically placed, as Parton was suggesting, we asked Michael Reconnaissance if this could be. He vetoed the idea immediately. His barometric bomb was just far too powerful. Any more than one of these bombs would have left far more devastation than we already see. In our third case scenario, we had the conditions presented by General Parton, and the facts seem to make his the strongest case of all. Remember, he's a bona fide demolition expert from the United States Air Force, and of the precise ilk the government would have brought forward a long time ago if his testimony had been favorable to them. Of course it's not. His scenario could have included Tim McVeigh only on the fringes at best, and certainly not the mastermind. You see, both General Parton and the BATF are very aware that if Parton is correct, and he is certain that he is, it would have to involve duplicity at the highest levels of government. Those columns could not have been drilled and wired, and those charges so strategically placed without a team on the inside. Some say that this would have taken several days and not feasible because the activity would have been witnessed by too many people. But General Parton says the columns did not have to be drilled and wired, not even wrapped, he says. He says a bucket full of C4 or C5, maybe a cubic foot in size and weighing about 60 pounds. Placed next to the columns he's identified would have had the sufficient power to shear those columns, turn the concrete to powder, and leave only the rebar as evidenced. This operation could have been performed in 10 minutes, said General Parton. And we found that to be interesting. The building foreman told us that there was no security in the Murrah Building after 11 o'clock at night, when the cleanup crew left. Only a night watchman who patrolled the area around the U.S. courthouse. Now, with proper timing in Watergate fashion, it would have been a simple matter for those with keys and knowledge of the alarm system to enter, place the charges, and then be gone from the area before the watchman returned on his routine rounds. If the truth is ever known, we agree with General Parton that of the three, this supposition will prove to be the closest to that truth. There were other innocent victims of this tragedy. First, the President and the Attorney General jumped to outrageous conclusions and seemed to make whatever public accusations that might prove to be politically expedient. They blamed in general the Christian right, and in particular the conservative talk show host and the unorganized state militia. The charges were all groundless, but because of the source, the news media had a field day for many days. One of these unfortunate victims was James Nichols of Decker, Michigan, the older brother of Terry. In the heat of the hysteria, the public sat back in wonderment as James was arrested without charges, indicted on flimsy circumstantial evidence, and placed in a federal lockup for 32 days. He was finally released when prosecutors admitted that there was nothing on which they could base a case against this man.
They arrested me. First it was protective custody. I argued with that. I objected to that. Then they brought up charges upon me, falsely. Indicted me with a grand jury indictment the day before we was going to have a probable cause hearing, because they didn't have any evidence for a probable cause hearing. So they used the prosecutor's grand jury rubber stamp. Afterwards, they let me out. Finally, after 3 court hearings, the judge said that he sees no evidence. They presented no evidence to connect me. And then Janet Reno come on last Thursday, the 10th of August, I think it was, said that I'm totally exonerated. They had no evidence. Well, if they didn't have any evidence after another 60 days of surveillance and investigation, how did they have enough evidence to put me in prison to start with?
Another tawdry example of the victimization of survivors is the Edie Smith and Kathy Wilburn story. So then all the letters that you received from the Red Cross, none had any money in it?
No, they didn't. And they were opened no matter how it was addressed, and this became a concern to me because there was such a massive volume of mail. And I was wondering, why were they opening our mail? So I called them. I picked up the phone and called them. The first person I talked to said, "Dad, we don't open the mail." I said, "Well, ma'am, I wouldn't make up this story or lie to you." I said, "Our mail is certainly being opened." And they referred me to Dee Jackson, the head lady of Red Cross, as I understand it, here in Oklahoma City, and she said, "We don't open the mail." And I said, "Well, our mail is being opened. Can you, and she said she'd check into it. When I talked back with her, we were told that she would put a stop to them opening the mail, but the mail was being opened because they were protecting us from hate mail. Red Cross was afraid that since Edie had had 2 children murdered, that people were going to send hate mail to her.
Did that ever occur?
No. Who would write hate mail to someone that had their children murdered? We never got one unkind letter. The people that took the time to write to us were people that were wanting to console us and extend their sympathies. There was never any hate mail.
It has been said many times that those that do not know the past are condemned to repeat it. But how will we ever understand this incident in the recent American past if we are confined to the headline version, which seems to be designed for public consumption in the interests of protecting a few very powerful people? And while we cannot yet be sure of what did happen that dreadful morning, these months of research for this documentary have made us absolutely certain of at least 2 issues. Firstly, a single ANFO explosion in a truck outside the building was not solely responsible for the enormous destruction and unprecedented loss of life. Secondly, as General Parton wrote to Congress, the effort required to mastermind and execute this intricate operation does indeed pale in comparison with the effort taken to cover it up. We must agree with Chuck Harder's opening statement. There is something very wrong with the Oklahoma story.
Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, the
First, it's a question about blowing up a building.
Are there any circumstances under which an individual is justified to blow up any building?
After you've evacuated it and you wanted to cover up the evidence,